Welcome. Today is the fourth Sunday in Advent, the last Sunday before Christmas. We have 4 candles lit in the Advent wreath. We're reading Tabitha's Travels by Arnold de Trede, and today is part 1 of the last chapter. Tabitha stared in disbelief. The man who had saved her was a woman and a cook. How could she overpower a thief like a butcher? "You're a woman!" Tabitha gasped. "Of course I am," the cook said as she pulled the cloak over her head. Zechariah took his off as well, and they hung the 2 garments on the line from which they had borrowed them. "Listen, Tabitha, just because you're a girl doesn't mean you're not as good as a boy." "That's what I've been saying," Tabitha cried. Zechariah shushed her and looked around nervously. "Come," he said, "we must leave this place before the rats come out." "And we must hurry to save your father," the cook said. They walked quickly up the side street then, with Zechariah holding tightly to Tabitha's tunic. "But who are you?" Tabitha asked, "and how do you know my name?" "Forgive me," Zechariah said as they scurried up the street. "I should have introduced you, Tabitha. This is Naomi, a friend I met this very night. She is the head cook for King Herod and works in the palace." Zechariah pointed to the palace towering overhead on top of the hill. "I saw you when you came to the butcher shop," Tabitha said. "Yes, and I saw you," Naomi answered, "but I had to pretend I was uninterested. I am not afraid of any man, but I could not have rescued you from 2." The 3 turned onto the main street that ran toward the base of the hill. "So how did you find Zechariah?" Tabitha asked. "After I left the butcher shop, I hid in the shadows to wait for Jehovah to provide a way to help you. After Zechariah left the shop, I pulled him aside, and together we made this plan. I knew those men would try to sell you to a Roman named Gaius. He's in town looking for slaves." "Yes," Tabitha shouted, "that is the name I heard." "So we borrowed the cloaks to hide our identities," Zechariah picked up the story, "and used surprise to our favor in rescuing you." Tabitha turned to Naomi and asked, "What of my father?" "He is well," Naomi said, "but he won't be for long. He is to go before Herod and Coponius this very night, following the feast being prepared even now." "Then we truly must hurry," Tabitha said, but then she stopped with a gasp and looked at Zechariah. "The scrolls!" she cried. "Your servant has not yet returned with my father's proof of citizenship." "Fear not, child," Zechariah said. "I shall wait here and bring it the moment he arrives." "But what if he doesn't?" Tabitha asked. Zechariah dropped to one knee and looked Tabitha in the eyes. "You must trust in God," he said. "There are many things in this life that we cannot control. You must have faith that God will take care of you and your father, either in this life or the next." Tabitha nodded slowly, although she still felt fear. "I will try," she said. "Come now," Naomi said, pulling Tabitha along. "You will pose as one of my child servants, but pray that we are not caught, or it will be the death of both of us." Tabitha shuddered a little as they headed up the steep road to the palace. She looked back to see Zechariah waving goodbye, and decided to believe that Jehovah really was still with her. At the top of the hill, Naomi led Tabitha around the side of the walled fortress. Tabitha gawked at the gold and marble pillars of the main entrance as they went by, but knew they would have to use the servants' entrance. As they walked along a narrow trail, a Jewish guard patrolling nearby eyed them suspiciously. Naomi went straight for a small door in the side of the wall where another Jewish guard stood post. "The cook Naomi and her helper girl returning from the village," Naomi reported to the guard. He looked Tabitha up and down, trying to remember if he'd ever seen this child before. Then he stepped aside and nodded toward the entrance. Naomi pushed the door open and stepped inside. Tabitha followed, trying not to look at the guard. She closed the door behind them, and Naomi let out a sigh of relief. "Safe thus far," she whispered, "but the real test will come later." Tabitha decided not to ask what that real test would be, nor did she have time. She was instantly struck by all the noise and commotion. They had entered the kitchen of the palace, where servants were busy preparing the evening feast. No less than 30 women and men scurried about the room, carrying platters and pots and piles of dishes. Steam rose from vats of boiling vegetables. Smoke cuddled the searing chunks of deer meat over a fire, and round loaves of freshly baked bread filled baskets on a table in the middle of the room. Tabitha had never seen a place such as this, and she memorized every cook and candle and carrot to tell her mother some day. "Father," Tabitha thought, remembering why she was here in the first place, "I've got to find Father and return him to Mother." Naomi went to the fire pit and sliced off a chunk of deer meat. She tasted it, then sprinkled some seasonings over all the portions. "A bit more coriander," she said. "Coponius likes it that way." She told one of her assistants to let the meat roast a short time more, then introduced Tabitha to a boy of about 12. "Simon, this is Tabitha," she said. "Instruct her well in how to serve the king." Then in a whisper she said to them both, "Her story is very much like your own." "Yes, Naomi," the boy said, and then turned and greeted Tabitha. "May you always find joy in your work here," he said with a bow. "Thank you," Tabitha replied, "but I hope my work here only lasts this one night." The boy looked shocked at this, so Tabitha gave him a quick explanation. "Then may you have success in freeing your father," Simon said. "Now I must teach you what you must know." And with that, the boy began explaining the rules. "Always keep your head down and your eyes on the floor. You must take off your sandals before entering the throne room. Never turn your back on the king. Walk backwards out of the room. Hold the serving dishes at arm's length in front of you." On and on and on until Tabitha thought they had more rules here than they did in Qumran. Simon had just finished explaining the rules when Naomi announced it was time to serve. A dozen children lined up, and each was given a dish to carry. Holding them out in front of themselves, with their heads down and sandals off, they all lined up, led by Simon. Tabitha stood at the very end of the line, and then followed it down the hallway. Simon made a left turn through an arched doorway, and when Tabitha reached the same place, she looked up and gasped. Consider this. What would happen if Tabitha let her fear rule her life instead of trusting in God?